Welcome to SmallTalk, where each week we sit down to discuss the sermon-based small group questions at Wallula Christian Church.
Hello and welcome back to SmallTalk, Wallula's weekly podcast. My name is Zach. I will be your host today, and I think every time we meet, I'm the host. I was just given that role. Just so you guys know how this works, your host is Zach Boland. Craig Archer is joining me. Our worship pastor and our senior pastor, Lance Kaufman, is here with me as well. Welcome, Craig. This is the first time we've seen you since Haley had the baby. Do you want to officially announce the name?
Yeah, Haddon Alice Archer.
Oh, good. I'm glad you announced it because I was like, I don't know if I'll pronounce it right.
Yeah,
So
I had a couple people ask me.
Yeah.
But people are more confident about pronouncing Haddon as opposed to Avid. Avid got way more questions.
Yes.
Or just other variations.
Yeah.
Avid. Heard Avid a lot.
Yeah.
That was confusing, but
yeah. And you told me this, and I actually just forgot. So Haddon, what does that come from?
We got it from Charles Spurgeon. That's his middle name.
Okay.
And then we liked it, and then we thought we could also call her Hattie. So there you go, Hattie.
So that's what it's going to be?
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. So Hattie, shout out to Hattie and to Haley.
I'll make sure she goes back and sees
Hattie
this.
and Haley, that's going to be
years down the road.
Are you both on board with the nickname?
Yeah.
I mean, because Haley is pretty close to that too. I wonder if that's going to be a mix-up for people.
Clayton.
Yeah, I don't know.
Clayton, we spelled with a K.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Sherry wanted to name him Clayton, and I thought, you know, this isn't a baby name.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it sounded, I don't know. I'm simple, so anything sounds so sophisticated to me, right? It's not Hank or whatever. And so I wasn't on board initially. I thought, well, I don't know about that. And then we decided, well, let's spell it with a K.
Yeah.
And by we, this was my suggestion, I think.
Your contribution to the name?
Yes, I think, as far as I remember. And so I said, let's spell it with a K, so his initials will be KC, and then we can call him KC.
Oh, okay.
Right? And Sherry said, whatever. And I had somebody tell me, well, is Sherry going to call him KC? And I said, I don't think so. She wants to just call him Clayton. And so my friend said, well, if Mom doesn't call him that,
Over.
won't be his name.
Yeah.
You know, he
Yeah.
won't go by that. So ended up being true.
Yeah.
And now Clayton, you know, they become
Yeah,
their
you
name.
can't imagine them as
Fill into
anything
the-
else. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
true. Well, we are we're going to jump in today. We are in Acts chapter 6, taking a break from Hebrews. And let's just start with the fun question, which it goes like this. Have you ever been lost? If you have, how did it happen? Did you start in the right direction? Did you take the wrong turn? Were you using a map? All that good stuff. What was the result of how you, we assume that you found your way back because you're here with us today. So, tell us a story about you getting lost at some point. What stands out to you?
Well, I've been lost a lot. You know, I just wander around through the world aimlessly much of the time. But I've told this story in a message before, probably more than once. But when I was a little kid, I didn't pronounce R's or L's well. I probably still don't pronounce R's and L's well, but I couldn't pronounce them. And so I'd say things like wabbit and wafudawato. And L's were sort of the same way, just kind of a different, and my name's Lance, which is sort of an issue with that. And so I was a little kid. I don't remember exactly how old, but little kid, 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, something like that. And we were at a store. I believe it was a Kmart. All right, so kids, ask your parents about Kmarts. And we were at the store. And
That's where I worked in high school.
I was with my older brother and my mom. And this was back in the day when parents did things like this. My mom was going to get whatever she needed, and we said, we want to go look at the toys. Can we go look at the toys? And she said, sure. And so we went to look at the toys, and we were browsing, looking at whatever Hot Wheels or GI Joes or whatever we were doing, and I looked up and my brother wasn't there. He had deserted me, gone his own way. And so and then I started walking. You do that thing in stores. You're walking down the aisles and you're looking, and couldn't find him, and I couldn't find him, and then I started to panic, because I didn't know where anybody was. I couldn't find anybody, and I started to cry. And I don't really remember how I ended up at the service desk, but somebody took me to the service desk, and so if you remember Kmart's, they used to have the intercom, and they said blue light special on aisle 4 or whatever the deal was. And so they asked me my name, and I'm crying and blubbering, and I'm telling this person my name, and they announce over the intercom, with the mother of Rusty, please come.
You added a syllable in there too.
Yeah, please come to the service desk. So I'm not really sure how they got Rusty from Lance. I don't know. I wasn't communicating well, but Mom, through her
Mother's
spidey
intuition.
sense,
just knew it.
She came up and found me. So took me home. Or maybe that's how I found my parents. I don't know.
They
thought it
was Rusty home.
It all worked out. Yeah.
Your parents went home with Rusty and got Lance.
Yep.
That's funny. I was, I guess I've gotten lost, a lot, if you will, but I can't, none of it was like super scarring. But one was like, I think I literally still have a scar from it on my thumb. It was the first ever mission trip I went on with Wallula. Mark Palmer, who was my youth pastor for like a year, my senior year. He came in like February. So, we overlapped just barely. But after my freshman year of college, he had, was leading a mission trip to Mexico to go build a house. And I'd never been on one. And so I was like, oh, can I go? And he said, yeah. And so I was super excited about it. We go. And before we drove down there and we stayed in El Paso the night before. And then the next morning we're going to get up and then go and start all that stuff. Well, I remember I was one of the college age people on this high school trip. And then there's another, actually, I think Jason Hodge was one of the, George and Jolene's son, one of our elders. Anyway, he was in high school, and I think one other guy. But anyway, I was the old one in the group with these two high schoolers, and we were in this church, and there's a big old hill that goes up, and it's just really far. And we're like, hey, can we go hike that? And there's nothing else to do in the afternoon. And he said, yeah, because I'm an adult, right? Which is, I was 19, and so that counts. And so I'm responsible for these two kids, and then we go and we hike. And I just didn't realize how quickly it gets dark, And so like we're going and we're like, whoa, this is getting crazy. Like at first it's funny, and you're like, whoa, we're like roughing it out here, as we're hiking. And then it's not so much like we're in woods, but there's definitely like taller bushes and whatever. And then we're like, okay, we probably should turn around. And so we turn around and we start going back. And all I know is it's downhill, but it quickly gets dark, and we don't know where we're stepping because it's like uneven. It's like kind of gravelly and rocks and cactuses and whatnot. And so, and the only direction we know is, well, if we're going downhill, it's probably safe. And I remember feeling really, really overwhelmed and not wanting them to know like how freaked out I was. Yeah. Right. And so I slipped a few times, and I remember I when I got back, I noticed there was just a massive splinter in my thumb that didn't come out for weeks. Like it was just this black dot, and we had a nurse who tried to pull it out, but it had just gone straight in, like perpendicular to where you couldn't, and so she couldn't grab it out, and then it just grew out one day. It just kind of. Anyway, we just kept walking downhill. We didn't know if we were veering off to the left or right, and then we started to see a light, and we're like, I think that's the church, and so we just sort of course corrected. We come in, it is dark. It's probably like 7 o'clock or something, but it's just really, really It's just really dark. And Mark was, if you know him, he's just a sweetheart of a man, and he's very even keel,
Right.
not super emotional. And he's like, "Where were you guys?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry, we were, this got caught in the dark." He's like, "Well, okay, glad you guys are back." And then it wasn't until I became a youth pastor that I was like, "Mark, why didn't you get on to me or something? Why didn't you say, like, why did you do this? You should have come back, And he's like, well, what good would it have done?" But, like, I didn't think it was a big deal at all until I really started to be responsible and realized three of our people are just gone in the dark somewhere
In a foreign country.
didn't think, well, close to it. We were at the border.
Oh,
we were still in El Paso.
Nice.
Yeah. But yeah, we were lost, and I was like, oh, I'm the one in charge, so that made it even scarier. So anyway, that was, just go downhill. That was the big thing.
Right.
There
You can only go downhill in one direction.
Right,
Survival
yeah.
tactics.
So
Yeah,
we're
you
kind of,
can.
but
From
you never know if
Zach.
you're, like, veering
Right.
one way or the other.
Right.
Anyway.
See, that's the deal with hills. You
Yeah.
know, it's all downhill.
Yeah.
In every direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
No, it is. I mean,
Yeah, it could be trouble.
you don't know if
Yes.
you're like, that's downhill and this is downhill
Right.
and
Right.
this is downhill.
Right. Downhill isn't a direction.
Right.
It's not on a compass.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I like the strategy. That's my kind of strategy.
I mean,
which is why I'm lost all the time.
We know we're not going up.
Right.
So
Just don't be on the hill.
Just
Right.
Yeah. If you're gonna fall, all right. All right. Let's move on. Craig, what about you?
All right. One time, let's see. This was 2009. So this was freshman year of college for me, and spring break. My friend and I decided to take a road trip, and our only goal was to get to Nashville. So we just kind of wing it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple points where we got lost, but the two that I thought of, this was like second day, and we were getting close to Nashville. We were in Kentucky, and then it starts getting dark. And like you said, it gets dark quicker than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no plan of where we were going to sleep that night. We were just going to drive and then see what happens. But then we ended up, we didn't have any plans. So anytime we saw like a road sign that was like, oh, here's this roadside attraction, we're like, okay. And then we just go do it. And then we're eventually on these back roads of Kentucky in these hills, just driving in the dark.
Right.
And we didn't know where we were at or where we were going to end up. And eventually we just found a campground and pulled in and slept in our car. And when we woke up in the morning, the camp host was like 30 feet away from us, just staring at us. So like the first thing I see is this man just looking at us, and I'm like, I don't like this. Like, we're the only ones at this campground.
Yeah.
And so we roll down the window, and he's like, you're gonna have to pay for this spot. I'm like, okay. Good thing we parked our car here. Could have just parked it anywhere, Walmart parking lot. So we paid for that parking spot, and we went on our way. But then
Busted.
when we got to Nashville, I was driving, and we were kind of in the downtown area, and we had a GPS, but we weren't really using it at the time. It was kind of like when you're on vacation, you kind of start to get the lay of like where your hotel's at and kind of where you're going and stuff. So I guess I got a little overconfident, and we were driving around in Nashville, and I took a turn down a one-way street, but I was going the wrong way, and I just turned, and immediately just cars coming towards me, and it's just like you freeze for a second, and your eyes get huge. And so I started driving and was gonna like make a U-turn, but then there was a garage, like a auto shop that was open, so I drove in there and then just like pulled out. But then like this was before smartphones.
Yeah.
I didn't have one yet. It wasn't before then, but I didn't have one yet. And so we were like trying to pull out this Garmin GPS and like figure out where we're at and stuff. And eventually we made it back to wherever we were going. But I was just driving in circles in Nashville for a while.
Yeah.
I had no idea where we were at.
Yeah.
I remember when this isn't really a big story, but just getting the GPS for the first time, a Garmin, and thinking like, well, this is like the future, right? And then I specifically, I used it, I loved it. And then I remember 2009, I was doing my brother-in-law's wedding, and my sister-in-law who was there, his sister, Maeve's sister, she was thinking, oh yeah, we were talking about technology that's going to be obsolete, and she said, "Oh yeah, eventually, Garmin's and stuff will just be on your phone, and you can do it there." And I was like, "No way! I'm not giving up this Garmin. It's too good. I don't care how far advanced it goes." And I just, if someone were to give me one for free, I'd be like, why would I leave this mounted in my car? And
now they come in the car.
It doesn't even seem like, at the time, I was like, I couldn't even imagine.
Right.
I was like, your phone is not going to be able to do everything. And,
But it does.
It's great. All right. Well, let's move on then. We are in Acts chapter 6. We're looking at verses 1 through 7. And we're looking at the choosing of the seven, some of the issues that the early church had and how they dealt with it, and the group that they chose to help lead that. So we're going to start with question number 3, and it goes like this. Do you think it's possible to offer constructive criticism without complaining? How? Is it ever necessary in the church? When is it necessary, and what criteria do we use to determine if we ought to offer constructive criticism? So we see in Acts chapter 6, there's some disagreement amongst the Hellenistic Jews and the Hebraic Jews. Hebraic, I don't say it like that very much, but and so we see this disagreement going on, and they present it before the apostles, and I guess the question is, as Lance wrote, like constructive criticism as a whole within the church, should we lean into that? Are there benefits to it? And if so, when should we do that? Craig, do you want to go first, or
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I thought about when I was reading this question and thinking about this topic was the first thing that came to mind was in Galatians in chapter 2. It's I wrote down verses 11 through 14. Paul talks about opposing Peter, and there's a situation where Peter is hanging out with people outside of his Jewish group, his culture, and then his friends show up and he draws back, and Paul calls him out, and or as it says, like he opposes him, but really it's a picture of constructive criticism, because Paul's plea is like, hey, you're not acting out the gospel right now. This isn't what Jesus would have us do. So he's looking at this situation. He sees something that's wrong and sees that what Peter's doing could cause people to stumble away or something, And so from a biblical perspective, he approaches Peter and says, let's not do this. And sure, it wasn't an easy conversation, and it was probably a little tense. I don't know what the situation looked like exactly, but there's absolutely points where things like that have to happen, because I think we talked about it a few weeks ago or something, but we're not perfect. We have blind spots. We don't see everything like we think we do all of the time. So if one of you needs to recorrect me and step in, and it's from a biblical standpoint, and you have grounds from Scripture that you believe you need to step in and say something, then absolutely, because what is that going to do? It's just going to redirect us back on course, staying on the same course. And so, yeah, I think it absolutely needs to happen for sure.
Yeah, and we kind of even talked about it, one of the words when we were in Hebrews, like the word exhort, and I remember saying, like, when I looked it up, it could mean encourage or even rebuke, and it's the same word.
I think that's what the conversation I was thinking of.
Yeah, and so, but the idea of rebuke, right? That is definitely something that belongs in the church, but it's based on exhorting to help people move on and move forward. And so, I literally was going through. You had a bunch of questions. Is it possible? How? Why? And I was like, is it possible to do it well? Yes. Is it necessary? Yes. And then like when? And so I was, you'd already said one of them, but when should you criticize or offer that constructively? And I thought, the betterment of the church. And so if you're not even if the church is immoral or doing something wrong, but just needing a nudge and saying, hey, I think we could do better at outreach. Or I think, I remember you talked about this when you first come to a church, you kind of notice all maybe the stain on the wall or whatever. And just so like helping to encourage like first impressions, or just here's some constructive criticism so that we could be better at what we're doing. I also thought about it in the context like constructive criticism when it comes to broken relationships, like someone just saying, "Hey, this isn't good. This isn't good. What can we do?" Or if you're noticing it between two other people and just saying, "There's a lot of brokenness going on here. How can we move forward?" Also, with leaders or programs within the church that aren't doing what they should.
Yeah.
And so it could be something small where it's like, hey, we're noticing this, and maybe it could be addressed, or even something big where there's actual corruption going on. And churches did need that. They, nowadays, I think more churches would have benefited if people had spoken out and said, this is not okay, right? The rise and fall of Mars Hill and, all these other things where it would have benefited for people to criticize in a constructive way. And so the question was, what's the criteria? Because some people are really good at the criticizing part. And even if it is presented in a constructive way, still though, it may not be necessary or needed. So how do you know? And so for me, I didn't have like a specific, like, I think I'm nailing it here, but I just thought like my heart. What are my motives by bringing this before you or the church or anyone else? Like asking myself, why is this upsetting to me? And the two options are, one is it's either hurting me or my pride. I don't like this. It doesn't make me feel good. I don't like the worship music or whatever else because of me. Or is it because I think I'm noticing a brokenness going on either in relationships or programs or connecting or whatever else. And so if I've searched my heart and I realize it's not about my wants and needs, but about something bigger in the church or to help the church, and I've prayed about it and maybe even sought the wisdom of others, then I would move forward with that. But yeah, and so I think you could have two people maybe criticizing the same thing, but not one is doing it selfishly and one is doing it selflessly. But yeah, what about you, Lance?
Yeah, I mean, you guys nailed it. Just to me, there are a few things that just fundamentally make sense to me, and one of those is that we are designed for community. I kind of think of it like I've always been involved with teams and in just every area of my life. You're involved with a team. I think about what's most important to me. Well, my family, that's a kind of team, right? There's this community that you're involved with. The church is a kind of team. You're involved with that community. And anytime you're involved with a team, I think one of the draws, one of the reasons that it's so important, that it makes a difference in our lives, is that it helps us to recognize that there's something bigger than ourselves, and we get to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And so to me, that's why this idea of, this question talks about it as constructive criticism. And here in Acts chapter 6, verse 1, it's just called a complaint, right? And I think sometimes, when is it constructive criticism and when is it a complaint? When is it complaining? Probably that has a lot more to do with the heart of the critiqued than it takes two to tango. And you're right, Zach, in that there are ways that we can raise our concerns without being overly critical. Maybe we need to, whenever I think just a hint, right? Whenever you're critiquing something, it's beneficial to, maybe sandwich. You guys have heard this, right?
Yeah.
To add some encouragement on either side, on both sides of the critique, because we need encouragement when we're going to hear the complaint.
Yeah.
We're going to hear, this is what you're doing wrong, and we'll take that to the bank with us, but we need the encouragement along with it. So there's little things like that maybe you can do to help the person hear it, but our heart has to be in the right place. I think about James 1, verse 19, it says, you ought to look towards this, to be, slow to speak and slow to anger and quick to listen. I think I got those in the wrong order, but you still get the point that we have to hear those things. We have, we are so easily offended in our world today. And I just heard a message a little while ago, and the preacher said he read a book. I think the book was called Unoffendable. I'm not sure if that's right, but I think that was the title. And the first line of the book is something like, "You don't have to be offended. You know, you can live without being offended." And the preacher said, that kind of offended me. Right? Because this guy doesn't know.
Right.
This guy doesn't know the criticism I deal with. This guy doesn't know that every day somebody is emailing me, or my kids are complaining about, or my coworkers are, tattling, or whatever it is. And every day people are criticizing me for all kinds of things. This guy doesn't understand that the world is full with evil and idiots, or evil idiots, and that's everyone else, right? That's not me. That's everyone else.
That's the worst kind.
Yeah, that's what this guy was saying, and I just thought, yeah, that's every one of us every day.
Right.
We're so easily offended, and everybody else is wrong, and we don't pay attention to James 1:19 enough. We hurry to say something, and we hurry to be angry. And then, oh, by the way, verse 20 in James chapter 1, talks about your anger doesn't do anything to bring about righteousness, right? Your anger, it's not making you more like Jesus.
Yeah.
And yet we're so quick to go there. And that's not to say there's no reason ever to be angry. But
that's another question. We can get to that maybe at next week's.
But we ought to be slow
to
be angry.
Yeah.
And we ought to really ask ourselves, am I angry because God is angry?
Right.
Am I angry because this is an injustice? Or am I just being offended? And, if the 12 here, if the apostles were offended, right, if they just say, hey, wait, no. A couple things could have happened. Because when I'm offended, when somebody says, hey, you're not doing this well enough. Why are you such a jerk? I have a couple of responses. Maybe I go, you're one of those evil idiots, right? And I just ignore it. Or I'm, oh, man, I am a jerk. I got to fix this. And I got to pour my energy and time and resources into fixing this. And what would have happened if the apostles said, they're right. We haven't been delivering food to these widows. And they spent all their time delivering food to the widows. There were two issues here in Acts 6, verses 1 through 7. One was the neglect of those widows, shouldn't have been. But two was the increase of God's word. And they said, hey, we can't stop praying and preaching in order to do this. And it would have been equally as bad if the word of God decreased, even for those widows to be fed. Now, be clear, right? We live in this world, too, that, well, just last night in the Super Bowl, there are these ads. You guys maybe saw the Jesus Gets Us ads. They've been playing in other places. And then you look online and people are instantly critiquing these ads, right? Jesus would never have spent that much money on a television ad. You could have used that whatever amount of money to feed the homeless. Well, this isn't an either or question. This is a yes and question. Right? Both of these things needed to happen in Acts chapter 6. The widows needed fed and cared for and loved, and the word of God needed spread and increase. You can't choose one over the other. It's not a question of which is more important. It's a yes and. We have to do this. And so if the apostles, all of that to say, if the apostles had been offended and reacted either by, you guys get out of here, well, that would have been bad. Or, yeah, we're going to take care of it ourselves. That probably would have been bad. Right. Now, God, maybe would have raised somebody else up to teach and preach and all those things. I don't, but
right.
But we have to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Pay attention to those things, and And so, yeah, it has a place for sure. I think we have to prepare ourselves, all the time to hear
Right.
those complaints and criticisms in our life, and just in the world, to be less offended
Yeah.
by those things. We have to be working on ourselves. And
Well, I was thinking that too with like just as someone as being pastors, we hear constructive criticism more,
Yeah.
and so having the wisdom to recognize, like first off, to not become angry, but also just, is this valid, and then also, is this something that I should be taking care of, or like in chapter 6 here, where it was delegated elsewhere, right? And so not just people pleasing, to say I'll take care of it, but to kind of know the balance of all that too. And sometimes people, will offer their genuine criticism, and it's like, I disagree.
Right.
I don't see it that way, and but still handling that, with grace. And
Yeah.
so having the wisdom to
yeah,
react to constructive criticism well is also a big deal. As we move on, we're going to look down at number 8, and it said, what role should prayer play in the mission of the church? And then what role should prayer play in your life decisions? And so we look at the 7 that were chosen to help in the situation. And it says, let me see, in the middle of verse 3. Well, I'll start with verse 3. It says, brothers and sisters, choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. We will turn this responsibility over to them, and we will give our attention to prayer and the ministry of the word. And so they, like Lance said, the idea of preaching and devoting themselves to that, while the other 7 were delegated to helping the situation. But when we look at prayer, what role should it play within the mission of the church, and also just within our lives specifically? I'll go. It's such a simple question that I was overwhelmed by, like, how do you,
Right.
what role? A big one.
Yeah.
One of the biggest ones. It's everything. And I was like, how do I answer this, and how do I convey, by just saying it's really important. It's very important in every aspect of the church and also my life. And we're to do it at all times, in every situation. James 5 tells us prayer is good for building each other up. It's good for guarding our own hearts, protecting ourselves, having the Holy Spirit guide us, to give us wisdom. Man, I literally pray that every time, almost every time I pray, if not every day. Even like at dinner time or when I'm putting the kids down, just pray for wisdom and discernment, seek wisdom above all else. I think also it helps with just how and I don't want to get like the non-spiritual side, but just how I feel, quieting myself and my thoughts to focus on God, having a quiet time, even incorporating we went to the Manhattan Christian College conference. And one of the things the guy did before he prayed for us was he said, I want you guys to be quiet for 2 minutes before I pray. And I remember being like, whoa, like Mr. Spiritual over here. And I've since done that. Like it really, it was really, really interesting to just like realize the struggle I had with that, but also how it calmed me before I even started to pray or hear his prayer. And so just that. And then also, helping me to focus and think clear on what like the rest of the day is going to be like, setting the tone, helping with my relationships. If I'm angry at Craig and I'm not praying, I'm thinking about this and the anger. If I stop to pray, I'm confronted with the fact that I should be also praying for Craig. And so it shifts my focus toward that. So it's one of the greatest gifts that God gives us. However, I do recognize why it's so hard. Like, for as great as I'm touting it, why do I still struggle? And you got to be disciplined to do this. Sometimes you really are busy. Sometimes you don't feel like it. We don't always see the results of what we're wanting. Here's what I want to happen, God. I'm praying and I really mean it. Right. And sometimes we don't see anything happening. And then other times when we do see results, it's not the results that I want, that I'm trying to pray for, that I'm desiring. And so a lot of the Christian life, we're called to be patient. And prayer is a practical sort of example of that. It's just going to take time. And prayer is one way for you to lean into that, like trusting in God's timing and being patient. And all of these downsides of prayer, whatever makes it hard, is I say that out loud because this is what motivates me to keep trying and leaning into it, because it's not easy. So I have to make a conscious effort to lean into it. As a church, I just think it helps us, as we're all separate and have our own opinions. It keeps us focused on the main thing, and it helps us to lift each other up as broken people trying to pursue Jesus. I could have gone more. I felt like I was trying to incorporate a lot.
Yeah,
like,
it
why
is a
is
big
prayer?
question.
Why is prayer important? So, what about you guys?
It is a big question. I like what you said about, that seminar in Manhattan and being quiet for 2 minutes and calming yourself and kind of centering your attention on him. I think those are spiritual disciplines. You kind of described it as, hey, it makes me feel better, and maybe that's not spiritual. You know what I mean?
I know. It needs to be painful and difficult for it to count.
Well, we talk about those things.
Right.
We shouldn't pray for the way it makes us feel.
Right.
But that is a benefit of prayer, is that if nothing else, we're supposed to pray for the presence of the Holy Spirit and for Him to be active, and He brings a peace that passes understanding, and all of those things. So it can, help us to feel better, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad. That's a good thing, in our life. But I think about that. One of the other exercises he had us do is, go around your table and say one word that wasn't this the exercise? One word that describes where you're at today,
like right before it started.
Yeah. And I just remember thinking, I hate this stuff.
That's Pastor Lance Kaufman.
Yeah, I just hate this stuff. And the problem is that it's often when I'm thinking, man, I hate doing this. This is not my personality. This is not, I don't even know there's real value in that stuff, right? There's value in stretching yourself. There's value in being uncomfortable. There's value in trying those things and just thinking in a way that you wouldn't normally think, and maybe even acting in a way that you wouldn't normally act. There's parameters on that, of course, but sometimes there's real value there. And so I'm just thinking this is for free, I suppose, but in your prayer life, maybe sometimes it's okay to be stretched a little bit, to try something new. A long time ago, I was teaching about prayer, and I came across this. It's a chant that these monks would do that, and they with rhythm. I don't have any rhythm, but a chant that they would do. And so I don't chant this, I don't think, but sometimes when I'm at a loss for what to pray, I taught this a long time ago, and I've practiced it ever since, just to say in my prayer and even out loud, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, right? Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Just that simple idea to focus our attention on Him and to invite Him to be present. If He knocks at the door, we have to invite Him in. We get that opportunity, and so prayer is difficult, but it's important.
Yeah.
I thought of reading this question, the lyrics to the hymn "What a Friend," and it says, what a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. And it's kind of it's a funny way to put it a little bit, because it makes it sound like this is so obvious. Like this is needless pain. Like why don't we just carry everything to God in prayer?
Right.
But I've always loved that hymn, and I was thinking about kind of the examples that we have of prayer in the Bible, and it just shows how essential it is, because throughout Jesus' life and his ministry continually went to God in prayer, whether it was in groups or on his own in isolation. He recognized the need for prayer. You think about Paul, even in writing his letters, there's prayers all over his letters. Different instances I thought of, like after Jesus' ascension, the disciples are kind of like, well, what do we do now? and they decided to go pray. Like that was their default. That's what
Right.
they went to. And so there's a lot of examples that we see. It's like, okay, this is necessary. It's needed. And I was thinking about it too, how it's worded in the question is, what role should it play in the mission of the church and then in our life decisions? And I was thinking about that, like more so, I guess, the mission part of it, but kind of the relationship aspect of our relationship with God and being on mission with Him. And I think about it in relationships, in a friendship or in a marriage. It's a two-way street. And like when you're getting to know someone, even just like dating, you don't go on one date and then say, "I'll see you in a month.
Right.
We'll see how this goes." Or after you get married,
Sometimes they said that to me.
depending on the situation.
And we're not going to see you again. This is,
But then you don't get married and then say, "I'm going to go do my own thing for
right.
6 months.
Right, yeah.
I'll catch back up with you."
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing. If we want to be on mission with God, we don't just pray like one day and then
Right.
we're going to take a little hiatus and we'll check back in.
Right.
Because then we're going to lose sight of the mission. Because if we're not checking in with Him, then our radar is going to be what's driving us, and we're not going to be thinking about what's God going to do through us today, what's the mission He has for us, what am I going to do. So it's kind of like you're praying to Him to build that relationship, to be reminded of the gospel, to be reminded of the mission that we're on. It's like this continuously like checking in sort of thing. And so that has to, like we've already said this, it has to be part of what we do as far as the mission of the church and our life decisions. That it's the beginning, it's the middle, it's the end of all of those things.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I as I thought about prayer here, and I just thought through the book of Acts, and so the early church is praying all the time. You know, all through the book of Acts, they're praying. It opens with them in prayer, right? Oh, we need to choose somebody to replace Judas. We're going to pray about this. Right here, they're praying to set aside, to send these 7 deacons into service, right? So they're praying all through it. A couple of my favorite stories in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 4, verse 31, they're gathered together praying, and after they prayed, the ground shook. You remember that? And it just it illustrates the power of prayer. And sometimes I think, you know, when's the last time the ground shook after I prayed? But even when you read through the book of Acts, the ground didn't always shake after they prayed. You know, God works in different ways.
Right.
God's active in different ways. But that was a visible, kind of physical reminder of them that God really is. The power of prayer is awesome. You know, it's He's really active, and He cares for us. And then later in Acts chapter 12, this is my very favorite story about prayer, I think, because it reflects my prayer life so accurately. Peter's in prison, and the church, the disciples, or at least a part of the church, is all together, and they're praying for Peter. And Peter is miraculously freed from prison. And he shows up at the door, and he knocks. And the servant girl goes to answer the door, and she opens it, freaks out. It's Peter. She slams the door. You know, that's the picture I get. I don't know. Slams the door and runs back to the church, to the prayer meeting, and said, "Hey, Peter is here." And the people in the prayer meeting praying for Peter's release, you know, this would be me. This is my prayer life. They say, "No, he's not.
We got to get back to praying here.
Yeah, you're crazy." They call the little girl crazy.
Yeah.
And she goes, "No, really." And Peter shows up. Peter's there. That prayer really works. Sometimes you hear things like, "Well, if you had enough faith."
Right.
Yeah, right? And God is at work, and you'd hardly describe the church as acting in faith there. They didn't believe that God would do what they were praying for Him to do. And yet kind of they did. and they were doing it right. I think there's great encouragement there for me. Is that it's chicken or the egg? Which comes first? Is it this faith? Is it this belief? Or is it the action? Is it the spiritual? We talk about, faith without works is dead, or we talk about, hey, you can't just serve because it's a duty. You have to serve with the right heart. Well, which comes first? Right? Is it the right heart? Is it the shape of your heart? Is it the attitude that you have as you serve, or is it the service? And I think those need to be aligned, but I wonder which comes first, and I'm not so sure. I probably different at different times or whatever. But sometimes we just have to keep it up.
Right.
Is all I'm saying.
Yeah, just to be faithful. We taught it on Sunday school lesson, and I remember one of the quotable lines was, we're not perfect but faithful.
Right.
And so just being faithful, even if it's we're not getting it right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have one more question. Do we normally go three full questions? I feel like it's the intro and two, but we're getting.
Usually we combine. These are like three
individuals.
So.
You guys are in for a treat. We have one more for you. Number 9. It goes like this. As we look at Stephen and the group that was chosen, it says, how can you follow the lead of Stephen and his buddies? How can you decide where to serve in the church today? So we see this group of men, but as we look at, Lance had said in a sermon, deacon and deaconesses here in the church, people who serve within the church. How do we follow the examples that we see here in chapter 6? What are the big takeaways? And also practically, how do we serve in the church as well? I thought, as I looked at Stephen, one of the things, and the whole group, one of the things that stood out to me is that they were willing. Initially, when the group went before the apostles and said, hey, we got this issue, they're thinking they're going to deal with it. Peter and everyone else will deal with it. And then Peter and the apostles flip it around and said, hey, we got a plan. How about you guys go do it, and decide amongst yourselves. And so they weren't expecting that. Stephen and the rest weren't expecting that. And yet, when the opportunity came, they were willing to step up and do that. The other thing is that they had to be chosen. So the rest of the church, were told to look for people who were full of spirit and wisdom, and this group of 7 stood out to them. So they were known. They were already showing what they were capable of, and so their strengths were known by all, being full of spirit and wisdom. And so they didn't just go to the church and walk out when it was over. But I think about it practically, like, do people know me in the church? Do they know my beliefs and what I'm passionate about? Do I have community, right? Do people, if there was a need, would they think, oh, Zach would be good for this because we know Zach? And so so that was kind of the loose ideas. And then also, like, how do you decide where to serve in the church today? I thought, man, that's a great question, because I think a lot of people, we don't have enough people serving, and it's not we need to get the numbers up, but I think people don't realize they have the opportunity to offer their gifts to the church. And so, and I know there's people who want to, and they just don't know. So I was thinking, asking yourself practically, what interests you? Like, when you look around and you see people serving on stage or in the sound booth or greeting or with the youth group or whatever else, like, does any of that stand out to you? That's a good litmus test. What talents do you have? And also, we did that spiritual gifts inventory, just kind of practically, like, where do I see myself gifted? But I think a lot of times we don't do anything because we're looking at the list. Do I line up with it? And so the big thing for me that I put was just do something. Right. Like, just try it. Just go do something. Throw yourself into something and see how it goes. And I forget who taught me this, but just the idea of it's better to fail going forward than to not do anything at all. And they compared it to skiing. So just start skiing. And then if you fall, you're going to fall forward. You're going to roll forward. But if you're wondering, like, I don't know how to ski very well, so I don't even want to try it, you're not going to move at all. So it's better to try out a ministry. And then if it doesn't work, that's not a failure. It just means, hey, I didn't think I was as gifted in this area, so I want to shift it to something else. And so maybe you're, I don't know if I'd be good at working with students. So you try that out, or working with kids. Yeah. And I think if you work with kids, you'll know quickly if that's for you or not, because that is it's not a casual thing. You realize if that aligns with your strengths or not. But then right? And so just keep trying and doing something, and then let God move you throughout that. And a lot of times I've found that it's surprising, especially having different youth leaders over the years, is that the people that I've seen really thrive in that weren't people you would think would be great youth leaders. Like, you think of people who are fun and exciting and maybe young, and I've seen empty nesters come and really just want to pour their lives into students and just thrive in that. And maybe they didn't even know it. But so yeah. And also recognizing people go through different seasons. So just because it's not good for now, maybe later. And so don't close the door on anything and say that's just not for me. Yeah. Just maybe not right now. And so that's what I got. What about you guys?
Yeah, no, that's great. One thing I thought of too when I was looking at this question was Haley and I, before we were here, we lived in Eudora, and we were part of Refuge Christian Church. Jeremiah Holcomb started that. You guys know Jeremiah, don't you? Yeah. And
didn't he take over for you? Didn't he follow you?
He was at Crossroads.
Oh, yeah,
he was a youth pastor at Crossroads.
That's right.
Maybe right after me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so we were part of his church plant there for a little while we lived in Eudora. We helped lead worship and do some other stuff. But one of the things that I really appreciated about him, and this is just kind of who he is, but then it spilled over into the church and kind of became like a little slogan of the church, was see a need and meet it. And that happened over and over and over. He said it so much, and he really led by example. And so, like, just so many things, big and small, in the community. If there was something that was a need, he was so encouraging to go meet it and make it happen. And I think that's a big thing with finding a place to serve, is first of all, there's some need. And I even think about too, like, there's certain things, like you mentioned, Zach, there's already places in the church that you can serve, and there's open spots available, and there's a need in all of those things. But then, like, in the college ministry that Haley and I have served with, one student just brought to our attention the campus house is across the street from KU's campus, and it's on this really unique spot where you have, like, the three most popular bars in Lawrence are right at the end of the street. So Friday night, the place gets trashed. The whole street is just full of garbage. And so one student just said, we need to clean this place up. And so they organized a cleanup every Saturday morning. They saw a need. This was a great way. Like, how unique is that? That college students are going to wake up on Saturday and go clean up their neighborhood. There's something unique about that. And their whole intention was, this is a great way to show that we care. We love our neighborhood. We're doing it from a place that it's like, we love Jesus. So we're going to show that love to this community. And so there's so many opportunities that you can see a need, meet it, fill a role. And I agree with all the stuff that you said. Like, we all have different gifts and talents and things, but one of the biggest things is jumping in and trying it. And you're going to find out quickly or sooner or later if it's a great fit. And if not, you can
that's okay.
go do something else.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you guys are, right on track, I think. I circled in verse 3, it said, talking about those 7 people full of spirit and wisdom whom we will appoint to this duty, and I just circled the word duty and wrote the word need next to it, right? So this is the need that you see. You guys have spoken to that. The only other thing I would add to that idea is maybe, you could draw a line from duty to complaint in Acts chapter 6 verses 1 through 7. So just thinking, hey, if you have this complaint, maybe that's the need you can help to solve and be a part of, and perhaps that can be an area of ministry for you. And so I think sometimes I've mentioned it a couple times in the last few weeks. I think I like this acronym SHAPE. As far as I know, it was originated by Rick Warren and Saddleback. I don't know. As far as I know, that's true. And it's the idea of spiritual gifts. So okay, this is how the Spirit has gifted me, our heart, so what we're passionate about, the kinds of things that move us and convict us, and all of that, our abilities, what talents do we have, our personality, and then our experiences, and so all of those things contribute to how we can be of service in the church. But so much of it is, hey, maybe there's this need, and I can help meet that, and I see it, on Sunday we talked about these ministry team leaders are deacons and deaconesses. They kind of that position or that title in church or whatever, but their sole purpose is to help everyone be serving, to utilize their gifts and to meet needs. And so you can find on the Church Center app, you go to groups, and then one of the groups you can choose is ministry teams, and you can see the list of ministry teams, and you can get connected to that ministry team and serve. So just on a very practical level, how do I start doing this? Well, that's you can get connected to the right people to help you start, and so you can jump in there, and right now on the Next Step station next Sunday, they'll you can find a hard copy of that if that's better for you, and have the contact information for ministry team leaders, and you can see the different ministry teams and what's available, and there are just always opportunities, even in the short term. Very soon, this spring, we'll have that service day with 1KC. I'd encourage everyone to try to carve out some time to be a part of that, and to just take those special opportunities to serve. There might just be special opportunities available at different times. Maybe, it's a trip with this youth group or with kids, and a special opportunity there, or there just might be those highlighted moments. So be on the lookout and pay attention, and jump in and meet a need.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Yeah, and I like that too, where I went through, like, what are you interested in, what talents do you have, but also what's annoying you, like what when you look around the church, what do you like, man, someone should do something, and that could also be maybe God leading you to take a next step.
It just, quick story, one time Joe Hutchinson after service came up, and he was like, he said something about the sound was a little off on the drum set, and then he walked away, and I was like, wait a second. So I found him the next week, and I was like, do you know how to run sound? And he's like, I don't know, kind of. He's like, I got an ear for it. I used to play music and stuff. And then he starts running the soundboard. Yeah, so it's like, if someone points something out, it's like, hey, you could help with that.
Well, because also it shows they have a passion for, they're picking up on something that maybe no one else is.
Exactly.
So that's good. Well, thank you guys so much. A lot of conversation today, but I really appreciate your thoughts and insights. And we'll see you next week.
All right.